Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive. Today, we're tackling Islam. And we've got some awesome material from the Islamic Bulletin to guide us. Ebooks, audio, videos, they've got it all.
Sounds like a treasure trove of information.
It is. And what's really cool is it's not just for experts or scholars. They've got stuff for everyone. People who already practice Islam, people who are curious, converts. There's even a section called How I Embraced Islam with personal stories.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting.
Yeah, really powerful stuff. So before we get too deep into the specifics, let's take a step back. What exactly is Islam? I mean, beyond the headlines and the sound bites, what's at the core of it all?
Well, at its heart, Islam is about surrendering to the will of one God, Allah. It's not a new religion, though. It's really a continuation of the message that's been revealed through prophets throughout history.
Okay, so not a new religion, but a continuation.
Right. Think of figures like Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus.
Oh, familiar names.
Yeah.
So Islam recognizes these prophets from other Abrahamic traditions.
Absolutely. Islam acknowledges and respects those earlier revelations. It sees them as part of a continuous message from God. But it also emphasizes the finality of the revelation through Muhammad. He's considered the last prophet in this chain.
Okay, that makes sense. So each prophet is like a building block, and Muhammad brings the whole structure together.
That's a good way to put it. And this leads us to something else that's central to Islam, the 5 pillars.
Ah, yes, the 5 pillars. We hear about them all the time. But to be honest, I'm a little fuzzy on the details. What are they exactly, and why are they so important?
Think of them as the 5 foundational practices of Islam. They're the framework for a Muslim's life. And it's not just a checklist, they're all interconnected. Each pillar reinforces and complements the others.
Okay, so they work together like a system. All right, hit me with pillar number 1.
First up is faith, or shahada. It's the declaration of belief. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger.
I've heard that before.
In Arabic, it's La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah. But it's more than just words. It's about internalizing this belief and living it out every single day.
So public declaration, A&D, a deeply personal commitment. Got it. What's next?
Next is prayer, or salat. Muslims pray 5 times a day at specific times facing towards Mecca. These prayers are like a rhythm to their day, a chance to connect with God and find peace amidst the craziness of life.
Okay, so 5 times a day facing Mecca. That creates a structure, a routine.
It does, and each prayer has its own specific movements and recitations. It's a beautiful and powerful practice.
I can imagine. All right, what's the 3rd pillar?
The 3rd is concern for the needy, or zakat. Muslims believe they have a responsibility to give a portion of their wealth to those less fortunate.
It's about sharing, right?
Exactly. It's about recognizing that all wealth ultimately comes from God and that we're just stewards of what we have. It's a way of purifying your possessions and strengthening your community.
It's not just charity then, it's more about social responsibility.
You got it. What do you think pillar number 4 might be?
Let me guess. Fasting.
You nailed it. It's self-purification, or fasting, and it's most famously observed during the month of Ramadan.
Right, Ramadan. No food or drink from dawn to sunset. That's intense.
It is a challenge, but it's about so much more than just physical hunger. It's about empathy, willpower, and focusing on your spiritual connection with God.
So it's a spiritual cleanse, in a way.
Exactly. A time to reset and reconnect. Now, for the final pillar, any guesses?
I feel like I should know this one. It's the pilgrimage to Mecca, right?
Yes. Pilgrimage or Hajj. If they are able, Muslims are expected to make this journey once in their lifetime.
I've seen pictures, millions of people all dressed in white performing the same rites. It's an incredible display of unity.
It is. It's a powerful reminder of the equality of all Muslims before God. It's about stripping away those worldly distinctions and coming together as one community.
It's a really beautiful image. So we've covered the core beliefs, the practices, but I'm curious about Islam's impact on the wider world. How has it shaped history, culture, civilization?
Oh, the impact is vast. Think of it like a wave of cultural and intellectual exchange. As Islam spread, it led to these incredible civilizations with advancements in practically every field imaginable. Medicine, math, physics, astronomy, you name it.
I'm all ears. Give us some specifics. What kind of advancements are we talking about?
Well, take something as basic as the numbers we use today, Arabic numerals, including the concept of zero, they originated in the Islamic world, or the astrolabe, a sophisticated navigational tool that was essential for exploration and map making. It was developed and refined by Muslim scholars.
Wow, I never knew that. So Those advancements, born out of Islamic civilization, eventually made their way to Europe.
They did, and they had a profound influence on the Renaissance and paved the way for the modern world.
That's incredible. It really flips the script on how we usually think about history. Okay, let's bring things closer to home now. What's the story of Islam in the United States?
It's a complex and diverse story, for sure. American Muslims come from all walks of life, different races, ethnicities, backgrounds. It's really a microcosm of the global Muslim community. But we can trace the presence of Muslims in North America back to the 18th century.
The 1700s, that early.
Yeah, many of the earliest Muslims in America were brought here as slaves. Sadly, their communities were often cut off from their heritage, their families, making it really difficult to maintain their Islamic identity.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But how did the Muslim community grow from there?
Well, in the 19th century, we see an influx of Arab Muslims, mainly settling in industrial centers. They often worshipped in rented spaces, slowly establishing communities. Then, in the early 20th century, there was a wave of Eastern European Muslims arriving. You start seeing mosques popping up across the country. For example, the first Albanian mosque was built in Maine in 1915, and a Polish mosque in Brooklyn in 1928.
So mosques started becoming more visible parts of the American landscape. What happened next?
Things really started to solidify mid-century. The Washington Islamic Center was founded in 1947, which was a significant moment. And then, in the 1950s, several nationwide Muslim organizations were established.
Creating a more unified community.
Exactly. They provided a sense of structure and support for Muslims across the country.
So what's the picture today? How many Muslims are there in America now?
Today, there are around 5 million Muslims in America, with over 1,000 mosques across the country. It's a vibrant community, unified by their faith, but also navigating what it means to be Muslim in America today.
Okay, so we've talked about history, global impact, but what about the heart of it all? What are the ethical and social teachings that drive Islam? What makes it tick on that level?
Well, Islam is deeply concerned with ethics and social justice. It emphasizes kindness, mercy, forgiveness. The Prophet Muhammad said, "God has no mercy on one who has no mercy for others."
Wow, that's powerful.
It is, and it's reflected in so many aspects of Islamic teachings. Family is paramount, honesty is stressed, trustworthiness, self-control, even the way you conduct business. There's a beautiful saying of the Prophet that associates truthful and trustworthy businessmen with prophets, saints, and martyrs.
That's a high bar. So it's about living your values in every aspect of life. But what about differing beliefs? Does Islam allow for that? And what about its views on the treatment of women? These are questions that often come up.
Absolutely, they're important questions. Well, Islam promotes human equality and tolerance towards other beliefs. The Quran states very clearly there is no compulsion in religion. So freedom of conscience is key.
No compulsion. So you can't force someone to convert.
Exactly. It's about respecting individual choice.
What about the legal framework? Does it protect people who hold different beliefs?
Yes, absolutely. Islamic law actually safeguards the rights of minorities. For instance, non-Muslim minorities are allowed to establish their own courts to handle family matters, so they can live according to their own beliefs and traditions.
So there's a built-in system for accommodating different faith traditions. That's pretty remarkable. Are there any historical examples of this tolerance in action?
A great example is when Caliph Omar entered Jerusalem in 634. He granted freedom of worship to all religious communities in the city. It set a precedent for how Muslims should interact with people of other faiths.
Wow, that's quite a legacy. It definitely challenges some of the narratives we often hear. But what about women in Islam? There are a lot of misconceptions about that.
There are, and it's crucial to address them. Islam sees women, whether they're single or married, as individuals in their own right. They have the right to own and dispose of their property and earnings.
So their economic independence is protected.
Right. And in a Muslim marriage, the groom gives a dowry to the bride for her personal use, and she keeps her family name. She doesn't have to take her husband's name.
So her individual identity is still valued within the marriage.
Exactly. It's about partnership and respect.
These are details you don't often hear. It definitely challenges some stereotypes about women in Islam. What about clothing? That's often a topic of discussion.
It is. Both men and women in Islam are expected to dress modestly, with dignity. But the specific traditions of female dress, they vary across cultures and regions.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Right. It's often more about local customs than strict religious mandates.
Context is key then. What about polygamy? I've heard it's permitted in Islam.
It is, but it's really important to understand the context. The Quran grants men the right to marry more than one wife only if they can treat all their wives justly and fairly.
So it's not a free-for-all. There are very specific conditions.
Right. And even then, it's not encouraged. Monogamy is still the norm in most Muslim societies.
Okay, that provides a more nuanced understanding. I'm also intrigued by how Islam views the elderly. In the West, elder care is often seen as a burden. Is that the case in Islam?
Not at all. In the Islamic world, there's a deep respect for elders. There are no old people's homes. Caring for your elderly parents, especially when they're at their most vulnerable, is considered an honor, a blessing, a chance for immense spiritual growth.
That's a beautiful way to look at it.
It's about reciprocating the love and care they gave you. It's a beautiful cycle.
Are there any specific teachings that support this perspective?
Oh, absolutely. The Quran addresses this beautifully. It says, "Your Lord has commanded that you worship none but him and be kind to parents. If either or both of them reach old age with you, do not say uff to them or chide them, but speak to them in terms of honor and kindness. Treat them with humility and say, 'My Lord, have mercy on them, for they did care for me when I was little.'"
It's a powerful message about respect, compassion, and gratitude. What about the Islamic view of death? Is it an ending or a beginning?
Like Jews and Christians, Muslims believe that this life is a test, a preparation for the next realm of existence. Our actions in this life have consequences in the afterlife.
So there's accountability, even beyond this earthly life.
Exactly. This life is a journey, and death is just a transition to the next stage.
Are there any rituals or practices surrounding death in Islam?
Yes, there are. When a Muslim dies, they are washed, usually by a family member, wrapped in a clean white cloth, and buried. Ideally, this all happens on the same day of death.
It sounds like a very personal and communal way of honoring the deceased.
It is. It's about the community coming together to support the grieving family and to prepare the soul for its journey to the afterlife.
It's a beautiful reminder that death is a natural part of life. Okay, now I have a question about something that often causes confusion: Islam's stance on war. What does it actually say about conflict and violence?
It's true that this is often misunderstood. Islam does permit fighting, but only in very specific circumstances.
So it's not just about going to war whenever you feel like it.
No, not at all. It's about self-defense, defense of religion, and fighting on behalf of those who have been unjustly expelled from their homes.
So there are very clear limits. Are there any other guidelines about warfare?
Yes, Islamic teachings lay down very strict rules of combat. For example, harming civilians is prohibited, as is destroying crops, trees, and livestock. War is seen as a last resort, something you only do when all other avenues for peace have been completely exhausted.
That makes sense. It's not about wanton violence or aggression. What about the term jihad? I hear that a lot, but it seems like people often misunderstand it.
You're right. Jihad is often misused and misrepresented. The word actually means struggle, and Muslims believe there are two kinds.
Two kinds. Okay, I'm listening.
The first is the inner struggle, the one every individual wages against their own desires and temptations. It's about self-improvement, spiritual growth, finding inner peace.
So it's about conquering your inner demons. What's the other kind?
The other jihad is the outward struggle. This includes self-defense, defense of the faith, protecting the oppressed. But even in those situations, war is only permissible as a last resort, after all peaceful options have failed.
So it's about protecting the vulnerable, standing up for what's right.
Exactly. Jihad is about striving for peace, both within yourself and in the world. It's not about conquering land or forcing conversions.
That's an important distinction to make. Okay, switching gears a bit, what about food? I know there are certain dietary laws in Islam. What foods are considered permissible and what's forbidden?
Muslims follow a dietary code that forbids the consumption of pork and any intoxicating drinks.
Why those specific
And
things?
reasons are complex. Some scholars say it's about health and hygiene, while others believe it's about cultivating self-discipline and obedience to God's commands.
So there are practical and spiritual dimensions to it. What other guidelines are there around food?
Well, the Prophet Muhammad taught that your body has rights over you.
So you have to take care of yourself.
Exactly. Taking care of your health is considered a religious obligation. Consuming wholesome food and living a healthy lifestyle are seen as acts of worship.
It's a holistic approach to well-being. Your physical health is connected to your spiritual health. Okay, what about human rights? We live in a world where those rights are constantly under threat, so I'm curious about how Islam addresses this issue.
Islam places a strong emphasis on human equality and justice. The Quran states, There is no compulsion in religion. That highlights freedom of belief and conscience as fundamental rights, and Islamic law protects the life and property of all citizens, regardless of their faith.
So there's a clear recognition of the inherent dignity of every human being.
Absolutely. And racism, for instance, is completely incompatible with Islamic teachings. The Quran emphasizes the common origin and fundamental equality of all humankind. It says, "O mankind, we created you from a single soul, male and female, and made you into nations and tribes so that you may come to know one another. Truly the most honored of you in God's sight is the greatest of you in piety. God is all-knowing, all-aware."
That's a powerful message of unity and equality.
Yeah.
We're all connected, ultimately. So we've talked about the global impact of Islam, the history in America, the core beliefs, the social teachings. But I want to know more about what it actually means to live as a Muslim in today's world. What are some of the challenges, the triumphs, the unique experiences of navigating your faith in a diverse and sometimes complex society?
That's a great question. I think one of the key challenges Muslims face today is overcoming negative stereotypes and misconceptions. The actions of a small minority of extremists are often wrongly attributed to the entire Muslim community.
It's like people judge an entire group based on the actions of a few.
It's unfair, and it leads to fear, prejudice, and discrimination.
How do Muslims combat these perceptions? How do they promote a better understanding of their faith?
Well, Muslims are increasingly engaging in interfaith dialogue and community outreach programs. They're sharing their personal stories, their values, their contributions to society.
It's about humanizing the experience, showing the diversity within the community.
Exactly. It's about breaking down those barriers and fostering mutual respect. But there are also challenges within the Muslim community itself.
What do you mean?
Like any faith community, there are discussions and debates within Islam about how to interpret and apply religious teachings in the context of modern life.
So how do you balance tradition and modernity? How do you engage with political and social issues?
Exactly. There are ongoing conversations about the role of women in society, about how to approach issues of gender and sexuality, about the use of technology. These are all complex issues, and there's no single monolithic perspective within Islam.
It's a dynamic faith, constantly evolving and adapting.
It is. And those internal discussions are a sign of a healthy and intellectually engaged community. It's through those conversations that Muslims can continue to deepen their understanding of their faith and find ways to live out its values in a way that is both authentic and relevant to the challenges of the 21st century.
That's so important. It's about staying true to your roots while also growing and evolving.
Exactly. It's a journey of faith. It's fascinating to think about, how these internal discussions shape the evolution of a faith over time. It's not static. It's living, breathing.
And speaking of living, breathing, I think it would be helpful to move into some specific examples of how these Islamic teachings actually show up in the daily lives of Muslims.
Yeah, let's get into the nitty-gritty. What kind of examples are we talking about?
Okay, let's start with the concept of modesty. While it's expressed differently across cultures, this underlying principle of, dressing and behaving in a way that's respectful and dignified, that's pretty universal in Islam.
Makes sense, aligning your outer appearance with your inner values. But how does this actually play out in real life?
For example, in some Muslim-majority countries, women choose to wear the headscarf, the hijab, as a symbol of their faith and modesty.
Yeah, I've seen so many different styles of hijabs, different colors, fabrics, ways of wrapping them. Is there a right or wrong way? Not really. There's no one prescribed style or color. The way women choose to wear it is often influenced by cultural norms, personal preferences, and their own interpretations of religious teachings.
So it's more about expressing individual faith and identity than conforming to a rigid dress code.
Exactly. And it's super important to remember that the decision to wear hijab should always be personal. No woman should ever be coerced or pressured into wearing it. It has to be a free choice made with conviction.
Absolutely. Freedom of choice should be at the forefront of any religious practice.
Are there other examples of how this idea of modesty is expressed in Islam beyond the hijab?
Absolutely. Modesty isn't just about clothes. It's also about behavior. Like in many Muslim cultures, lowering your gaze when you're interacting with someone of the opposite gender, that's seen as a sign of respect.
It's interesting, right? Something as simple as eye contact can have so much cultural and religious significance.
It does. It highlights the importance of, being sensitive to different customs, different ways of doing things. Speaking of different customs, I'm curious about the role of art and architecture in Islam. I've always been blown away by mosques, the intricate details of Islamic calligraphy, but I'll admit I don't really know much about the symbolism.
Oh, Islamic art and architecture are full of symbolism and meaning. They really reflect this idea of beauty, order, transcendence. Those are all central to the Islamic worldview.
Okay, so can you give us some specific examples? Like, what's the deeper meaning behind the features we see in a mosque?
Sure. Well, first off, mosques aren't just places of worship. They're also community centers, places for learning, for gathering, for social interaction.
It's interesting how the architecture itself supports those different functions. What are some of the key features you might see?
One of the most obvious is the minaret. Those tall, slender towers.
Yeah, they're hard to miss.
They're often used to call Muslims to prayer. And they symbolize the ascension of the soul towards God, this connection between heaven and earth.
They're like a beacon reaching up to the sky.
Exactly. And then inside the mosque, you'll usually find a large open prayer hall. Often it's decorated with beautiful carpets and these intricate geometric patterns.
I've seen those patterns. What do they represent?
They represent the infinite nature of God and the interconnectedness of all creation. And there's also a niche in the wall called the mihrab that indicates the direction of Mecca.
So Muslims face the mihrab when they pray.
Yes, exactly. The architecture itself guides you in prayer. What about Islamic calligraphy? Have you ever seen that up close?
I have. It's amazing, the artistry, the precision.
It truly is. Islamic calligraphy is considered a sacred art form. It elevates the word of God to the highest level of artistic expression. The beauty of the calligraphy is meant to reflect the beauty of the divine message.
So it's about more than just writing words. It's about imbuing them with spiritual meaning.
Yes. And one thing that makes Islamic calligraphy unique is the use of Arabic script. It's so fluid and rhythmic. Calligraphers use all sorts of different styles and techniques to create these stunning compositions, often incorporating geometric patterns and floral motifs. It's like a visual symphony.
It's mesmerizing to watch them work. Why is calligraphy so highly revered in Islam?
Well, Islam places huge importance on the written word. The Quran, the holy book of Islam, is believed to be the word of God as revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. So transcribing the Quran is seen as an incredibly spiritual act, almost like worship.
It's like you're honoring the words through the beauty of your writing.
Exactly. The calligraphy enhances the spiritual power of the words.
Okay, I want to talk about music now. I know there are so many musical traditions around the world, so I imagine there's a wide range of interpretations and expressions within the Muslim community, right?
Yeah, I'd imagine so. It's not a monolithic faith, so there's bound to be diversity in how music is approached. You're right. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. But there are some general guidelines and principles that Muslims consider.
Okay, so what makes music Islamic or not? What are the boundaries?
One key principle is that the music shouldn't distract from the remembrance of God. It shouldn't lead to, inappropriate thoughts or behavior.
So it's about keeping the focus on the spiritual, on your connection with God.
Right. And that can lead to a lot of different expressions musically. Some Muslim cultures embrace instrumental music, focusing on traditional instruments and melodies. Others might emphasize vocal music, particularly chanting Quranic verses or devotional poems. It really varies.
It sounds like a rich tapestry of musical traditions. Are there any genres or styles that are popular across different cultures?
One genre that's gained a lot of recognition is Sufi music.
Sufi music, I've heard of that.
Sufism is a mystical branch of Islam that emphasizes the spiritual journey towards union with God. And their music often features chanting, poetry, and those whirling dances that are supposed to induce a state of spiritual ecstasy.
Oh, wow. That's intense. It sounds like a really powerful experience.
It is. It's very transformative for a lot of people.
Let's shift gears a little bit. I want to delve deeper into the Islamic concept of charity. We talked about zakat as one of the 5 pillars, but I'd like to understand the broader philosophy of giving in Islam.
Sure. Charity is deeply embedded in Islamic teachings. It's not just a good deed, it's actually seen as a moral obligation, a path to spiritual purification.
A moral obligation.
Yeah.
What drives that sense of obligation?
Well, one of the primary motivations is the belief that all wealth ultimately belongs to God. We're just stewards of what we have, and it's our duty to share those blessings with others who are less fortunate.
It's a humbling reminder, right? That our material possessions are temporary, and true wealth lies in our actions and our relationship.
Exactly. And giving in Islam isn't just about poverty. It's about promoting social justice, fostering community, solidarity, recognizing that we're all interconnected.
So it's a much broader concept than just giving money to the poor.
It is. And besides zakat, which is obligatory, there are also voluntary acts of giving known as sadaqah.
Sadaqah. What are some examples of that?
Sadaqah can take so many forms. Giving money, volunteering your time, donating blood, offering a kind word to someone who's down, even just smiling at a stranger.
So it's about being mindful of the needs of others and finding ways to help however you can.
Exactly. And the beauty of sadaqah is that it's accessible to everyone, no matter your financial means. It's about cultivating a spirit of generosity.
I love that. It makes generosity an everyday practice. This whole conversation about Islamic values and practices is fascinating. It's really given me a much deeper appreciation for this faith that's often misunderstood.
I agree. It's a faith full of depth and nuance.
Well said. Now, I know we need to talk about Sharia law. It's a term that gets thrown around a lot, but I think it's often misunderstood and misrepresented.
Oh, absolutely. It's time to demystify Sharia law.
Let's do it. So first of all, what is it exactly? How does it actually work in the lives of Muslims?
Okay, so Sharia literally means path or way, and it refers to the body of Islamic law that guides Muslims in their lives, both personal and social.
So it's like a roadmap for living a life that is pleasing to God.
That's a great way to put it. Sharia covers a wide range of topics: prayer, fasting, charity, marriage, divorce, inheritance, crime and punishment. You name it, it's probably addressed in Sharia.
Wow, it sounds pretty comprehensive. But where does Sharia law come from? What are its sources?
The primary sources are the Quran, the Holy Book of Islam, and the Sunnah. That's the teachings and practices of the Prophet Muhammad.
So it's based on divine revelation and the example of the Prophet. But how is Sharia law interpreted and applied in today's world? I mean, things have changed quite a bit since the 7th century.
Yeah, that's where things get a bit more complex. Islamic scholars and jurists have developed different schools of thought and methods of interpretation over the centuries. So the way Sharia law is understood and practiced can vary depending on the culture, the legal system of a particular country.
So there's no single monolithic interpretation.
Right. It's not a rigid set of rules that's just blindly followed. It's more of a dynamic, evolving system that's constantly being reinterpreted to fit new situations.
That's pretty different from how it's often portrayed.
It is. The goal of Sharia is to promote justice, fairness, the well-being of individuals and society as a whole.
Okay, so it's not about being harsh and oppressive. It's about guiding people towards a more ethical and moral life.
Exactly. It's a framework for living a good life, a righteous life.
This is really helpful in understanding how something like Sharia, which often gets demonized or oversimplified, actually functions within Islam.
I think it's crucial to provide that context, that nuance.
Absolutely. It's about seeing things in their proper light.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the legal framework of Islam, but what about the mystical side? Earlier we mentioned Sufism, and I'm really intrigued by that. Can we explore that a bit more?
Absolutely. Sufism is fascinating. It emerged in the early centuries of Islam as a movement that emphasized inner transformation and the pursuit of spiritual enlightenment.
So it's like a spiritual path within Islam, a more mystical approach to the faith.
You could say that. Sufis believe that true knowledge of God comes through direct experience, not just intellectual understanding. They focus on purifying the heart, cultivating love for God, experiencing His presence.
Sounds like a very experiential, intuitive approach to faith. It's about feeling your faith as much as thinking about it. What kind of practices do Sufis engage in to cultivate this connection with God?
Well, Sufi practices vary, but some common ones include meditation, chanting devotional poetry, and rhythmic movements like whirling.
Whirling, like the whirling dervishes. I've seen pictures of them, but I never understood what it was all about.
Yeah. Sufi whirling is a form of moving meditation. It's meant to induce a state of trance, spiritual ecstasy. The whirling dervishes spin gracefully with their arms outstretched, symbolizing their surrender to God, their desire to transcend the ego.
It sounds beautiful and incredibly powerful. Makes me think of that Rumi quote. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there.
Oh, Rumi is a perfect example. He was a 13th century Persian poet and mystic, and his poetry is amazing, full of beauty, wisdom, spiritual insight.
I've read bits and pieces, but I need to dive deeper. What are some of the themes he explores in his work?
His poetry often revolves around love, longing, separation, union with the divine. He uses such vivid imagery and metaphors to convey the mystery of it all.
It sounds like a glimpse into the heart of Sufi mysticism. Are there any other Sufi poets or mystics you'd recommend exploring?
Oh, tons. There's a rich tradition of Sufi poetry and prose. Rabia al-Adawiyya, a female Sufi saint, was known for her intense devotion to God. Then there's Ibn Arabi, a scholar and mystic who created this complex system of Sufi metaphysics. And Al-Ghazali, a theologian who actually integrated Sufi thought into mainstream Islamic discourse.
It's amazing how Sufism has enriched and expanded the intellectual and spiritual landscape of Islam. It reminds us that faith isn't just about rules and rituals, it's about the inner journey, the yearning for connection with the divine.
Beautifully said. That inward journey is for everyone, not just Sufis. It's for anyone who seeks a deeper connection with something bigger than themselves.
Well said. So we've touched on the mystical, but what about the role of education in Islam? I know seeking knowledge is highly valued, but how does that translate into actual educational practices?
The pursuit of knowledge is considered a sacred duty in Islam. There's a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, seeking knowledge is obligatory upon every Muslim. And that doesn't just apply to religious knowledge.
Oh, so it's broader than that.
Much broader. Muslims are encouraged to seek both religious and secular knowledge. It's about understanding the world around us through the lens of faith and through reason and observation.
So finding that balance between spiritual and intellectual growth.
Exactly. And historically, this has led to some incredible Islamic educational institutions.
What are some examples?
One of the oldest and most renowned is Al-Azhar University in Cairo, founded in the 10th century. It's been a center of Islamic learning for over 1,000 years.
Wow, that's incredible. What do they teach there?
The curriculum includes Islamic studies, of course, like Quranic interpretation, Islamic law. But they also teach secular subjects, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, literature.
It's impressive how Islamic education embraces both faith and reason, weaving them together.
It's a holistic approach that has contributed a lot to the advancement of knowledge throughout history.
It speaks to the power of Islam to inspire both spiritual and intellectual inquiry. And this isn't just a thing of the past.
Right. Today, Muslims all over the world are pursuing education, contributing to advancements in science, technology, the arts, you name it.
It's an incredible legacy, and it's still unfolding today. It's clear that education is a vital part of Islamic life. It's about building a better future, both for individuals and for the world.
It's about using your God-given talents to make a positive impact. So we've talked about education, but I think it's time to address the elephant in the room, the concept of jihad. It's a term that's often misunderstood, misused to justify violence and aggression. But it's so much more than that.
I think it's time to clear the air. What does jihad actually mean in Islam?
The word jihad literally means struggle, and it has a bunch of different meanings in Islam.
Okay, so it's not just about warfare.
Not at all. The most important jihad in Islam is actually the inner struggle, the struggle against your own ego, desires, temptations. It's about purifying your heart, cultivating virtue, drawing closer to God.
It sounds like an internal battle that we all face, regardless of our religious beliefs.
You're right. It's about striving to be the best version of yourself, to overcome those negative tendencies, to live a life that's aligned with your values.
But what about the other types of jihad? The ones that involve, like, outward action?
Islam does recognize that armed struggle can be legitimate, but only under very specific circumstances.
What kind of circumstances?
Things like self-defense, defense of the faith, or protecting people who are being oppressed. But it's crucial to emphasize that war is always seen as a last resort.
So it's not about being aggressive or going out to conquer. It's about protecting yourself or others who are vulnerable.
Exactly. And even then, there are strict ethical principles that govern how war is conducted in Islam.
Okay, so what are some of those principles?
Well, for instance, it's absolutely forbidden to kill civilians, to destroy property, or to target non-combatants. War is a serious matter, and there are limits.
Those are important safeguards to ensure that even in extreme situations, there's a sense of morality and restraint. But I still wonder how this idea of armed struggle can coexist with the emphasis on peace and compassion that we see in other aspects of Islam.
That's a really good point. It's about balance, right? Islam recognizes that sometimes force is necessary to resist oppression and injustice, but that force must always be used with restraint, wisdom, and only as a last resort.
So it's about protecting the innocent and upholding justice, but always striving for peace whenever possible.
Exactly. And that balance is constantly being negotiated, reinterpreted in the context of new challenges.
It's a complex issue for sure. But this conversation has really helped me understand how a concept like jihad, which is often so distorted in the media, actually functions within the broader ethical framework of Islam.
I'm glad to hear that. It's all about context and nuance.
Well said. Now, I'm interested in delving into a topic that's often fraught with cultural baggage. Family and gender roles. What does Islam teach about these things?
That's a big one. And you're right, it's a topic that needs to be approached with sensitivity. Where would you like to start?
Okay, so what are the key principles that inform the Islamic perspective on family?
One of the foundational principles is the importance of family. It's seen as the cornerstone of society, a sacred bond that provides love, support, stability.
That resonates across cultures, right? The importance of family.
It does. Islam recognizes both blood ties and marital bonds in creating that family unit. Parents have a duty to nurture and guide their children, and children are taught to respect and honor their parents.
Okay, so those are pretty universal values. But what about the roles of men and women within the family? Are there specific expectations or limitations based on gender?
Islam acknowledges that men and women have different roles and responsibilities, but those differences don't imply inequality or superiority.
So it's about complementarity, not hierarchy.
Exactly. Men are typically seen as providers and protectors, while women are primarily responsible for nurturing and raising children.
Those are pretty traditional gender roles. But how do those roles play out in modern life, where women are increasingly pursuing education, careers, leadership positions?
It's a good question, and honestly, it's a question that's being actively debated and reinterpreted within Muslim communities around the world. As societies evolve and gender roles shift, Muslims are grappling with how to reconcile traditional teachings with contemporary realities.
So there's an ongoing conversation within Islam about how to adapt and apply these principles in a changing world.
Absolutely, and that dialogue is so important. It's about making sure that Islam remains relevant and meaningful to future generations. It's about honoring tradition while also embracing the complexities of modern life.
It's encouraging to see that Islam isn't static, it's evolving.
Exactly. It's a dynamic tradition capable of adapting to new challenges and embracing a diversity of thought and practice.
That's a great point. So we talked about gender roles, but what about the Islamic concept of social responsibility? I know Muslims are called to be agents of positive change in the world, to stand up for what's right. Can you talk about that?
Sure. This idea that our spirituality should have real-world implications is huge in Islam.
Yeah.
Islamic social activism takes a lot of different forms. It could be advocating for marginalized communities, working to end poverty, promoting peace and interfaith dialogue, protecting the environment. It's about putting faith into action, making a real difference.
So it's a holistic approach to social justice.
It is, and it's all based on the belief that all human beings are created equal and deserve dignity and respect. It's about living out those values in every aspect of life.
But how do you balance that call for social justice with the emphasis on obedience to God? Do those two things clash, or can they work together?
Another great question. Muslims believe that true submission to God involves not just following his commands, but also working to create a world that reflects his attributes of justice, mercy, and compassion.
So it's not enough to just be personally pious. You have to actually go out and do something to make the world a better place.
Exactly. And this understanding of Islam is what inspires so many Muslims to be activists, to be advocates for change.
It's inspiring to see people putting their faith into action. But what are some of the challenges that Muslim activists face, especially now with all the Islamophobia and anti-Muslim sentiment?
One of the biggest hurdles is overcoming negative stereotypes. Muslims are often portrayed in the media as violent, oppressive, incompatible with Western values. It's really tough to get your voice heard when people have all these preconceived notions.
It's like people already have their minds made up before you even start talking.
It can feel that way. And that's why it's so important for Muslims to be part of the public conversation,
Right.
to challenge those stereotypes, to show the world what Islam is really about.
It's about reclaiming the narrative,
Well-
right? Sharing their own stories, their values, and their contributions to society.
Exactly. It's also about building bridges with other communities, working together on shared goals, showing that Islam is a force for good.
It's a reminder that we all have to do our part to fight against ignorance and prejudice. We all need to work together to build a more just and peaceful world.
Beautifully said.
This deep dive into the social and ethical dimensions of Islam has been so insightful. It really highlights the power of faith to motivate positive change.
It's been amazing to see these values in action all over the world, inspiring people to work towards justice, equality, and peace.
I've learned so much today.
Me too. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to explore.
I'm ready for the next layer. What else have you got?
Okay, let's talk about something that often sparks a lot of curiosity and maybe even some anxiety. The Islamic concept of destiny.
Destiny, that's a big one. Is it all preordained? Do we have free will? What does Islam say?
Well, Muslims believe that God knows everything that's going to happen, past, present, and future. This knowledge is called Al-Qadar, and it encompasses all of creation, including our individual destinies.
So God has a plan. But does that mean we're just puppets with no real control over our lives?
No, not at all. While God knows what will happen, we still have free will. It's a delicate balance.
So our choices still matter. It's not all set in stone.
Exactly. We're not just passively floating along. We have the power to make choices, and those choices have consequences.
Okay, so how do those two ideas fit together? How do you reconcile God's knowledge with our free will?
It's a deep concept, but it's beautifully expressed in the Quran. There's a verse that says, God does not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. So even though God knows what's going to happen, we can still change our circumstances, make different choices.
So we have agency, but God is still in control.
Yes, ultimately, God sets the course, He knows the destination, but within that framework, we have the freedom to navigate our own journey.
So it's about finding that balance between surrender and striving, acceptance and action. It's about trusting God's plan while also taking responsibility for our choices.
That's a great way to put it. And that understanding of destiny can be both comforting and motivating.
How so?
It's comforting to know that even when things feel difficult, you're not alone. God has a plan. And it can motivate you to strive for excellence, knowing your efforts matter, your choices have meaning.
It gives you a sense of purpose, even when things are tough.
Exactly. You're not just wandering aimlessly. You have a role to play in this grand story.
That's a beautiful way to think about it. Okay, this has been a really interesting conversation about destiny, but I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, social justice. Can you talk more about the Islamic perspective on that?
Sure. Islam calls on its followers to be active in the world, to stand up for what's right, to fight against oppression. It's about more than just personal piety.
So your faith should have real-world implications.
Absolutely. Islamic social activism takes many forms. Advocating for the marginalized, working to end poverty, promoting peace, protecting the environment. It's about putting your beliefs into action.
It's a holistic approach, addressing a range of issues. It's about making the world a better place. But how do Muslims reconcile that with the idea of submission to God?
Muslims believe that true submission to God means not only following His commands, but also trying to create a world that reflects His attributes of justice, mercy, and compassion.
So your actions in the world are a reflection of your faith.
Exactly. It's not enough to just be personally good. You have to also work towards a better world for everyone.
What are some of the challenges Muslim activists face, especially with all the negativity towards Islam in the world today?
Well, one of the biggest obstacles is overcoming negative stereotypes. So often, Muslims are portrayed in the media as violent, oppressive, backward. It's hard to get people to listen when they've already formed these judgments.
It must be frustrating.
It is. That's why it's so important for Muslims to be engaged in public discourse, to challenge those stereotypes, to show people what Islam is really about.
It's about reclaiming the narrative, showing the diversity and the beauty of Islamic traditions and values.
Yes. It's about sharing their stories, building bridges with other communities, demonstrating that Islam is a force for good in the world.
Actions speak louder than words. It's about showing, not just telling.
Exactly. And that's something we all can learn from, regardless of our beliefs. We all need to work together to create a more just and peaceful world.
This deep dive has been truly inspiring. It's shown how powerful faith can be in motivating positive change.
I'm so glad you feel that way. And this is just the beginning of the conversation. There's always more to learn and explore. It really is. There's always something new to discover. And that actually makes me think of this beautiful Islamic concept of Ihsan.
Ihsan. I don't think I've heard that one before.
It means excellence or beauty. And it ties into this idea of always learning, always striving to be better.
Okay, excellence, beauty. I like it already. But how does that play out in Islam? What does it mean to do things beautifully?
It means bringing that intention, that mindfulness to everything you do, your worship, your work, your relationships, everything. It's about bringing a sense of quality, a sense of excellence to all aspects of your life.
So it's not about just going through the motions. It's about putting your heart into it.
Exactly. And it's not just external. It's about cultivating inner beauty too. You know, those virtues, that spiritual refinement. It's about becoming the best version of yourself.
It's a holistic approach to personal growth, inner and outer. striving for balance and harmony.
You got it. And this emphasis on personal transformation, I think that's one of the things that makes Islam so dynamic and vibrant. It's not just about rules and beliefs, but about constantly striving, improving yourself, drawing closer to God, making a positive impact.
It's a lifelong journey of growth and evolution.
Beautifully said. Now, I know this is a topic that can be a bit, well, sensitive, but I think it's important to talk about the Islamic concept of destiny, qadar. It touches on some big questions about divine will and free will.
Destiny. It's something that's fascinated people for centuries. What does Islam teach about it? Is our fate already written?
Muslims believe that God knows everything that's going to happen past, present, future. This knowledge is called al-qadar, and it encompasses all of creation, including our own destinies.
So God has a plan. But does that mean we're just puppets? No free will?
No, not at all. Islam also teaches that we have free will, that we make choices, that we shape our own lives. It's a delicate balance between God's knowledge and our own agency.
So it's not all predetermined?
Not at all. Our choices have consequences. They matter.
Okay, so how do these ideas work together? Divine knowledge and free will.
It's beautifully expressed in the Quran in a verse that says, God does not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves.
So even though God knows what's going to happen, we still have the power to change things.
Yes. We can make different choices, influence the course of our lives. We're not just along for the ride.
But ultimately, God is still in control.
Ultimately, yes. He set the course. He knows the destination. But we have the freedom to navigate our own journey within that framework.
Surrender and striving. Acceptance and action. It's about finding that balance.
You said it. And this understanding of destiny, it can be very comforting.
Comforting how?
Well, it's comforting to know that even when things are tough, you're not alone. God has a plan. It gives you a sense of peace. But it can also be motivating, you know? It pushes you to strive for excellence, knowing that your efforts matter, your choices matter.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between trusting God's plan and taking responsibility for your own choices.
Exactly. This whole conversation about destiny has been really thought-provoking. It's a new way of thinking about how we approach life, how we make choices.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up, I want to bring it back to social justice. We talked about it earlier, but can you elaborate on the Islamic perspective on this?
Sure. So Islam is very clear that its followers need to be active in the world, to stand up for what's right, to fight against injustice. It's a fundamental part of the faith.
It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. Islamic social activism takes many forms, advocating for the marginalized, working to eradicate poverty, promoting peace and interfaith dialogue, protecting the environment. It's a wide range of issues.
It's about recognizing that our faith has real-world implications.
Exactly. And it all stems from this belief in the inherent equality and dignity of all human beings. It's about creating a world where those values are upheld for everyone.
But how do you balance that with the idea of submission to God? Are those two ideas at odds with each other?
It's a good question. Muslims believe that true submission to God involves not just following his commands, but also working towards a world that reflects his attributes of justice, mercy, and compassion.
So it's about taking action to make the world a better place.
Right. And it's that understanding of Islam that it calls for both personal and social transformation that inspires so many Muslims to get involved in activism and advocacy.
It's amazing to see people of faith working so hard to make a difference. But what are some of the challenges that Muslim activists face?
One of the biggest challenges is overcoming the negative stereotypes that are so prevalent in the world today. Muslims are often misrepresented in the media, portrayed as violent or oppressive. It makes it really hard to get people to listen, to see them as partners in creating a better world.
Those stereotypes are so harmful. They create barriers to understanding and cooperation.
They do. And that's why it's crucial for Muslims to be part of the conversation, to challenge those stereotypes, to show the world the true face of Islam.
It's about sharing their stories, building bridges, demonstrating through their actions that Islam is a force for good.
Yes. It's about actions speaking louder than words, and that's something we can all learn from, no matter what our beliefs are. We all need to do our part in fighting for justice and creating a more peaceful world.
This whole discussion has been incredibly eye-opening. It's inspiring to see how faith can motivate people to work towards a better world.
It's been a privilege to share these insights with you.
This deep dive has been amazing. It's shown me how much more there is to Islam than what we often see in the headlines.
I think what's most fascinating is how interconnected everything in Islam is. The 5 pillars, the concept of ihsan, the focus on social justice, it all comes together to create a way of life that's deeply spiritual and actively engaged with the world.
It's about finding that balance, faith and reason, personal piety and social responsibility, tradition and modernity, and doing it all with wisdom and compassion.
Beautifully put. As we wrap up this deep dive, I just want to leave you with one final thought. Islam is a lived experience. It's a tapestry woven from the stories and struggles of over 1 billion people worldwide. Keep learning, keep engaging with that diversity. You'll discover that the beauty and wisdom of Islam are best understood not through abstract ideas, but through the lived experiences of those who embrace it.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for guiding us through this exploration of Islam. It's been an incredible journey.
The pleasure was all mine.
And now we leave you with the Shahada in Arabic.